Merry Christmas, Happy Yule, Happy New Year, and of course Happy Hanukkah to our most beloved philosophers of the distant right who have made a portion of it go mainstream. Tonight's video is going to be complimentary and fun-spirited because it's the hacking holiday season. A perfect moment to spend time with your family, give and receive gifts, roll up to some woman while drunk so she could accuse you of a sexual assault 40 years later, and most importantly, binge watch content you like. There's plenty of options for that. Nosferatu, Squid Season 2, the recent What If Old His schizophrenic meltdown lasting 10 hours, and of course what I'll be talking about today, which is the fractions of the dissident right. A general overview, which of them are worthy of your attention and which you should probably avoid. Now, in my video I won't be naming the absolute lowest bottom of the barrel, just scratching the surface that has some propellants or something that's jammy, so if you didn't appreciate your ideology being included on the list, it just means that it sucks ass and you should probably perform a late-stage abortion on yourself. Just kidding, of course. A lot of the content was cut from the video for YouTube, but if you're familiar with any of the movements I'll be discussing, you're probably already aware of what I'm not mentioning. The reason why I'm not including fascism, incels or the JQ or Duginism or any similar movement is because we're on YouTube, but if you bother me enough about it on X, I can eventually release a Substack article. Now, I also did not include Hopianism because it doesn't intersect with the DR as much and theoretically you could have any cultural views under it. I'll also not be covering What If Old His guy because after conducting a Twitter poll asking this very same question, that was before his meltdown, it became clear that he's just not part of the movement.
Let me drink another cup of kratom. God, I might need more CBD. You know, you guys can go fuck yourselves, right? I am here showing you how beautiful my octopus mug is.
Thank you, Prophet. May I continue now? Where was I? Oh yeah, similar to Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, these people are much more mainstream and I really find it hard to differentiate them from, let's say, Christian nationalists and similar groups who are not DR. And a DR by definition means someone who has been expelled from the mainstream, which means that their positions are outside of the Overton window. Spiritualism, anti-vax, pro-Z and global warming denial narratives appear to be well within the reach of the right-wing Overton window as it currently is. And before I begin, I highly recommend you to watch Keith Wood's video of the same title and exploring this Substack series by the Anglo-Futurist. They address points I won't be covering here as my focus lies on entirely different aspects. That being said, hop right on and I'm about to take you to Hyperborea, or whatever other world Rudyard lives in. The first fraction of the distant right belongs to generic rightoids, sort of like your uncle who retweets funny stuff on Twitter. They don't have a coherent, well-thought political ideology, but they agree on virtually all positions of the right in the culture war. I would describe them as political centrists, which exist between the right and the far right, forging alliances with both. They are extremely anti-establishment, oftentimes conspiratorial, while nonetheless funny. In one breath, they can praise Hitler's conquests of Europe, in the next freak over Klaus Schwab's latest plan to take over the world and vaccines, moving closer to people like Alex Jones. But one thing that is most consistent about them is that they are nationalists and populists. The group is exceptionally creative too, serving as the originators of nearly all of the rightist memes circulating online. There isn't much political theory with them, as I said, but there's a lot of entertainment, shock humor and hot takes. If I were to give a rough estimate of their presence online, I would estimate them to be the largest distant right fraction that oftentimes serves as the first step of radicalization before branching out to, any of the other branches of the distant right. People who prefer to laugh at leftoids and establishment hacks would definitely appreciate. A good example of a generic rightoid would be iHypocrite, whose YouTube channel I really love binge watching from time to time.
And as a general rule, it's not my policy to kick people while they are down. Having said that, if it then comes out that the reason for your divorce is because your wife was doing OnlyFans and she was getting blacked behind your back by a porn star and she wanted to open up the marriage, and at that point you are still expecting me to not make fun of you a little bit, look, I'm sorry, but
I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. Don't put your blame on me.
The second group of people I call IQ autists, but perhaps more academically they can be referred to as the Biorealist Right, headed by people like Ethereum Magazine, Emil Kierkegaard, Edward Dutton, Sebastian Jensen, Sean Lass, Cream U, I.O., Nathan Kafnes, and many more. As evidenced by this survey from Emil Kierkegaard, they aren't particularly deranged, generally prefer liberal democracy to authoritarianism, typically come from good backgrounds, and for all intents and purposes could be described as the elite human capital of the right that Richard Hanania and his followers so badly wish they could become. According to a survey of Emil Kierkegaard's audience, 40% of them have master's degree and above, are well-read, not conspiratorial, are extremely politically heterogeneous, but united in their acknowledgement that human behavior, culture, and institutions are a reflection of the biological sum of the individuals behind them. Unfortunately, they barely exist on YouTube due to its censorship policies, but completely dominate Twitter and are also very powerful on Substack as well. Their ideas are good quality and are hugely influential in the minds of every other dissident rightist, who in turn too is a biorealist, at least with regards to race and sex.
It's just obvious. You just look at the trends.
So Boss Vito says, what are your thoughts on enormous stits? I've never heard of enormous stits, and I've just Googled enormous stits, and there's not much online about enormous stits.
I've never heard of this individual either.
Tweets called enormous stits, so I don't know who enormous stits is.
My only pretension towards them is that they come from all walks of political life and won't unite under a specific political ideology like right-wing progressivism, or that they aren't willing to integrate the findings of biorealism and Darwinism in every facet of social life, including morality. However, according to surveys, they seem to be pretty right-wing on social issues, and politically they exist somewhere between the tech right and the racialist right. Group number 3. The Bananiasphere, or elite human capital, or the counter-signaling right. They are a collection of right-wing contrarians who like to signal about how superior and morally righteous they are in relation to the rest of the dissident right. They do so by relentlessly mocking and baiting rightoids while adopting morally upright stances such as supporting Israel, voluntary euthanasia, open borders, women's empowerment, laughing at male mediocrity, and taking other bold positions like initially backing the Russian invasion of Ukraine before abruptly flipping and then implying they supported Ukraine all along. Among their members you can count Richard Hanania, Red Femme Hitler, Captive Dreamer, Anatoly Karlin, and to a lesser extent Richard Spencer. They are first and foremost contrarians who love power and prestige, and so the entirety of their reasoning as well as Twitter attacks can be dumbed down to status attacks in which the correctness of a position is determined by the social status of the people holding said positions as opposed to the merits of said position on its own, a genetic fallacy turned into an ideology in a sense. That is, however, not to suggest that they are incapable of making valid points on occasion. Despite their flaws, including tendencies towards psychopathy, their insights sometimes merit consideration, as their commentary on the dissident right is often remarkably accurate. I have learned a lot by reading articles by Richard Hanania and Anatoly Karlin, who I would consider to be representing the core of the movement. Unfortunately, you won't be able to find any of them on YouTube. You have to go to Substack or Twitter, because YouTube does not reward aggressive trolling and baiting as much as these other platforms, so your exposure to elite human capital can only be done through Substack or Twitter.
No news and nothing's happening and the timeline's dead, and I'm sick of it. Frankly, I'm sick of it. I'm gonna go out and start making some news. If there's not some news in the next couple of weeks, I think I'm gonna go out and just start making some news.
America First, or Groypers, form a right-wing to far-right Zoomer movement led and organized by their charismatic leader Nicholas J. Fuentes, with the principles outlined in this article that I wrote for them. I won't be repeating what I wrote in this video because I want to incentivize people to actually read my Substack because it's an exclusive, and the fact that it's been reviewed so highly positive by people who are in the know makes it a good article.
You're a very funny guy. You make very subtle arguments and you tell a lot of jokes.
Now, the movement exists in every single platform, but is mostly highly concentrated on Twitter, or was mostly concentrated on Twitter. It is well organized and more powerful than any other movement on the dissident right, if we were to judge by engagement alone. Their strength is more pronounced in dogpiling and giving the illusions that they're much more powerful than they are. However, with the recent changes to Twitter policies, or more specifically Elon Musk's mental breakdown, this may no longer be the case. Think of the Proud Boys, but much younger, without this performative masculinity, and operating primarily online. This is who the Groypers are, a group largely responsible for radicalizing millions, including prominent figures, on topics such as the Jewish question, demographics, Catholicism, as well as fostering a genuine appreciation for a Zoomer culture that I truly embraced because of them.
Because what I want to do,
And while they can be criticized for their optics and extremism, I have done so myself, such critiques often fall flat for those enchanted by the charismatic leadership of Nicholas J. Fuentes, who amassed some sort of a cult following.
So then, when they thought it couldn't get any more over, I was there, and I think it just proved the point that I could go on InfoWars with Kanye West and say, I love Hitler, and not lose a single supporter.
And while Nick Fuentes is undoubtedly the most charismatic and effective force not only on the dissident right but on the right as a whole, the main weakness of the movement lies in the fact that it will most likely get disorganized and regress to a generic rightoid stage if something were to happen to its leader. It's already known that there have been multiple attempts to harm him in his own house, one of which escalated to an attempted assassination that ended in a triple homicide. Thankfully he survived, but his life is still in danger. As you can imagine, the Groypers are probably the most controversial bunch in the dissident right. That is why the mainstream doesn't like them, that is why Elon Musk is banning them. They're masters at producing very polarizing reactions from every direction, which is why I should probably stop talking about them and talk about something less controversial. Post-Neoreactionaries is a group largely composed of Catholic reactionaries shaped by ideas of Curtis Yarvin, a prominent critic of democracy and human rights. Yarvin is credited with popularizing and coining the terms such as the cathedral, red pilled, the iron law of oligarchy, and many others. You can learn more about these concepts by watching a video I created on Neo-reactionaries, and then once you're done with that, watch this video, it is far more in depth than mine. Now, the Post-Neoreactionaries diverges from Curtis Yarvin's neo-reactionary framework by discarding his positive vision of a decentralized cameralism and patchwork, instead gravitating towards a deeper exploration of his intellectual predecessors, Musk, Carlyle, and Burnham, while also incorporating insights from figures such as Samuel Francis, Pendrell, Carl Schmitt, and Patrick Deneen. Their biggest members include the distributist, to some extent academic agent, and of course Aaron McIntyre, who has helped to popularize it in the mainstream. Their arguments are interesting. They're very heavy on developing their own qualitative methodology, and for this they are being taken seriously, given that their followers include people like Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance, among many others. At the same time, their fault lies in the fact that they're mostly focused on criticizing leftist cultural power, as opposed to offering something new besides common traditionalism that we've all tried. And while they may be insightful sometimes, at the end of the day they are called neo-reactionaries for a reason, and that's kinda lame. I don't wanna go 400 years back in time. I actually want to go 400 years forward in time.
Decide to become the kind of person who adopts as many problems that he can solve as possible, so once they're all solved, he reaps the rewards and builds a fantastically large empire with so much money he can't possibly spend it, internationally renowned and respected.
So the Tatosphere is a combination of the Manosphere, self-help gurus, and generic rightoid baboonery with Andrew Tate being at the center. It is perhaps the worst fraction of the Dissident Right because it is proudly anti-intellectual, aggressive, dumb, and narcissistic.
This is a fucking setup. All of it is. And listen, quiet.
I have already made a video about their ideology and I won't be repeating myself again here. Instead, I'll talk about them as a movement, and they are a very recent and growing movement. Most of the people in it started off as completely apolitical or were part of the Manosphere. They then began consuming so-called self-improvement content, and due to their already existing or emerging anti-establishment tilt, they eventually fell under the spell of generic rightoids and Groypers. Dan Bilzerian probably encompasses this transformation the best. He originally started off as a Manosphere fuckboy celebrity before overnight turning into a Jewish scholar.
You sound like a Nazi. I'm honestly gobsmacked. What do you like about Jewish people?
I mean, I would say on average they're more intelligent.
This group exhibits even less ideological depth than generic rightoids with their vague references to the Matrix, a concept which yet remains to be defined. They also stand out for their pronounced third-worldism compared to others on the list and for being significantly more militant and uncompromising. After all, masculine energy is something that they have in abundance. Ironically enough, it possesses far greater potency than the masculine energy of Vitalists and Nietzscheans. Now, I've never been a Manosphere guy myself, it's not my cup of tea, but in case you like edits and Sigma moments, got tired of watching tips on how to approach women, and so you're looking for some excuses as to why women should become subservient, or why the Jews are the root of all evil, and how you can make $1 million from the comfort of your home, there's no better place to learn about all of that than from the Hustlers University directly. It will only cost you $49.99 for a month, but the benefits far outweigh the costs. So hurry up before it becomes $147 again. The clock is ticking and you've only got 24 hours left. Nietzsche has had a profound effect on the right, but there exists only two modern interpretations of Nietzsche which are consistent with the Dissident Right. The first one by Costin Alamario or Bap, and the second one by Richard Spencer and Mark Brauman. The former scorns the so-called IQ nerds, derisively labeling them as bugmen, and instead prioritizes aesthetics, physiognomy, and other visual attributes. They champion masculine vitalism, favoring it over intellectualism and conventional morality, which has been feminized, they say. As the Anglo-futurist explains, Bap wants to create a brotherly fraternal order where men can naturally dominate over weaker, inferior forces and beings in a Nietzschean fashion, inspired by various warrior castes in pre-Christian age, calling all of this the Bronze Age mindset. Though as based and green-pilled as it may sound on the surface, it is surprisingly being followed by people like Dasha Nekrasova, Pariah Dadal, and other people you'd not suspect being on our side.
Basically, it is, if you're not familiar, the manifesto of a deeply closeted gay man who has this psychosexual affinity for the Bronze Age, back when men were manly.
It also, strangely enough, gets mainstream attention, or should I say mainstream praise, and is even liked by Ben Shapiro.
But Politico, I think, does not do justice to the actual genius. I mean, I think it's actually quite brilliant, much of Bronze Age mindset, and as much as I disagree with a lot of it, and I think a lot of it is offensive and terrible and gross, you can't deny that it's incredibly well structured and well written. Like the guy who wrote it is a very, very smart person.
It is unclear why, given that it's mega racist and fascist, and Ben Shapiro is not supposed to be that, but perhaps it has to do with the fact that it also contains a heavy Jewish element, both at the leadership level and also at the level of the following. But that aside, let's talk about ideology. And I have read both of Bab's books. One I have even reviewed on Twitter, the link is in the description. They are interesting, thought-provoking. Perhaps we need it on the right, but I think that Ben Shapiro is being too generous. The second Nietzschean project is Richard Spencer's Apollonialism, which differs from Bab's interpretation of Nietzsche by relying more heavily on the elite human capital counter-signaling mixed with first worldism as opposed to vitalism and Conan the Barbarian type of mindset, so characteristic of the previous. It is far more intellectual and interesting to interact with, but it's not as widespread as the previous form. Obviously, there are also other Nietzschean currents of the right. You can also describe Richard Hanania's ideology as a form of a Nietzschean liberalism of the right. Not a racist liberalism of Richard Spencer, but a Nietzschean liberalism, which is also quite interesting, and I've read the article. Finally, there's Uber Boyo. Please don't confuse him with me. He's probably the person who has deviated from Nietzsche the least, for he has internalized him to such an extent literally half of the videos on his YouTube channel are about Nietzsche, helping to popularize him to the normie audience. So if you want to get educated on Nietzsche and apply his analysis to multiple things, you should definitely check out his YouTube channel. And of course there are other projects, but I doubt we can seriously regard Camille Paglia or feminist Nietzscheanism of Red Femme Hitler as part of the Dissident Right. Sorry, but feminism is definitely not part of the movement. So the next category refers to a type of people who focus on international affairs as opposed to ideology or culture. Think of NAFTA people, the Atlanticists, neoconservatives, or on the other side, Duginists, third worldists, or MAGA communists. They generally range from third worldists to Oswites to really Straussian stuff. They don't particularly talk about domestic affairs unless it's in relation to a foreign country they support or oppose. Here's how supporting Russia is actually right-wing, or here's how supporting Ukraine is even more right-wing, or here's why celebrating Assad being gone actually makes you a better cock race trader, and finally here's why the EU is actually one step away from transforming into a right-wing anti-brown superpower. I lump them all together because they still hold many distant right values. They just use them to shield or denounce the country of their choice. Imagine you're talking about the needs to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine, and out of the blue someone says the following: do you know that Russia is becoming an Islamic caliphate and Putin literally jails white nationalists? And you're like, okay. Obviously, it can go in every direction, this is just a particular example, but you get what I'm talking about. People are supporting or opposing stuff solely because it's good or bad for a specific country that is not their own. I won't drop any names here, and to some extent I engage in that myself, most of it of course ironic, but I'm pretty sure I'm unironically supporting Biden over Trump because Trump is better for Israel than Biden, even though Trump is much better than Biden for America, to an extent underlines a major problem with the dissident right. And don't get me wrong, the mainstream does that all the time with Israel, but we don't have to do it ourselves, do we? Perhaps the most OG category of the dissident right are the people who are concerned about demographics. Those who want their country to be composed of those like themselves, those recognizing that race and identity has an effect on social outcomes and the demographic composition of your nation ultimately determines its destiny. This category is as broad as it gets, for it includes people as tame and well-spoken as Jared Taylor, Noel Carl and Bo Weingart, but it can also include unironic schizos and likely psychopaths whom I won't name drop in this video, though I will eventually write a Substack article about them.
You see, that's an excellent example of the schizophrenia our government suffers from when it comes to race. In terms of housing or schooling, we're all supposed to pretend that race doesn't matter for anything. And yet when it comes to voting, our government drew these special districts so that non-whites could vote non-whites into office. The assumption being that, well, gosh, race does matter. Well, does it or doesn't it? My view is race definitely matters. And this undertaking we've had for the last several decades, well, since about the 1960s, that we're going to build a society in which race can be made not to matter, is just as much a misreading of human nature as what the socialists tried to do, the communists, that we were going to build a society from each according to his ability, to each according to his need.
Now, the white advocate position is both rational and morally defensible, but its message struggles to reach a broader audience largely due to a targeted repression and political burdens imposed by a latter fraction of its followers. The Racialist Right is a single-issue big tent umbrella that encompasses everyone ranging from classical liberals, right-wing progressives, fascists, conservatives, Groypers, Nietzscheans, or even leftists who share the fundamental core issue. This can be both praised and criticized, and I have not yet determined whether that is an advantage or a disadvantage. On one hand, they justify their position from multiple angles, borrowing insights from elsewhere. On the other, the movement is too disorganized with varying opinions even on the central issue. Is the end goal imposing racial restrictions on immigration, a quota system, stopping the anti-white bias? Is it about creating the second Israel in the middle of America? Is it a form of cessation? Is it forced deportation? Is it some form of a Nazi Germany reborn? Or is it a moratorium on immigration as advocated by Richard Spencer? Or simply normalizing white identity politics as envisioned by Eric Kaufman? There's a lot of debate on the specific preferred outcome, while also there's a lot of disagreement on pretty much everything else on the elite level. Whether this eclectic coalition can translate its sentiment into policy remains an open-ended question, but the recent alliance with the populist right and the backlash to anti-white hatred certainly makes it more plausible, at least on the mass level. At the same time, Georgescu had popular support too, and guess what happened to him? That said, this has been my introduction to the dissident right. It's been a wonderful journey that led me into a place where I am now and a place where I will be until I am dead. In contrast to the previous racialist right, right-wing progressivism has more chances to get implemented into policy. Yes, it is the smallest ideology on the list for now, but it can theoretically intersect with the mainstream. And while I was the first person to name it and theorize what it means, before certain people have decided to copy portions from my original video and place them in their text without reference, I'm humble enough to admit that I'm not the only one pushing for it. Right-wing progressivism in a nutshell sees progress as an increase in quality as opposed to the increase in quantity. It encapsulates the idea that the right must drive history forward by presenting an innovative alternative which has not yet been tried before. We thus want to establish a monopoly on progress by bringing social systems to a higher level of efficiency. We don't wish to equalize outcomes or achieve sustainability or whatever. We want to achieve a vertical progress towards better organizational states, aka greater total output of an organization. Now, I differ from the mainstream right-wing progressives in a way that I see the nation as an organism and apply insights from Darwinism to also promote white advocacy and social conservatism or other lifestyles that are evolutionary adaptive. In addition to advocating for new approaches to government that would make it a reflection of people's political choices to the same extent as the market is a reflection of people's consumer choices.
The end point of political history, as I see it, is to transform the laws of politics to be in accordance with the laws of nature, while nonetheless aiming to master them in a long march of progression. The progressive march towards greater mastery will be accompanied by the assimilation of the most highly functional outcomes from other realms, and their integration into the political system. The eventual culmination of this is the creation of a highly optimized political ecosystem in which functional agency is expressed. This would lead to the abolition of the managerial class, not replaced with any particular class of rulers, but rather by an aggregation of functional agencies formed at the intersection of spheres that in their totality form the social organism, no longer constituting a separate class, but rather the living expression of the comprehensive development of the nation. By doing this, both tyrants and the general population are removed from the political equation, which in turn becomes dominated by general laws of organization, integration, and self-selected actors possessing both the agency and competence to engage in politics, differentiation. All advances in politics until the middle of the 20th century were in the direction of greater agency and improvement to the infrastructure of the sphere in which such agency is expressed. However, with the ascendance of the managerial class, these advances have all but ceased, turning political evolution in the direction of power grabs by leftist identitarians. Abolishing the managerial class with its infrastructure and replacing it with the generalized estate is thus the next logical step of political progress toward greater function. It is in this regard the triumph of technocracy in politics will mark the death of the traditional command-style political system, just as the functional triumph of the market economy forever discredited Marxism, feudalism, and slavery. In a state of politics increasingly governed by technological dynamics, the state comes to embody the spirit of its active elements in their entirety, as opposed to a particular element converting other elements into a homogeneous unit. That point will signify the triumph of the generalized estate.
Imagine a limited direct democracy, but the one that is actually working. Future editions of the right-wing Progressive Manifesto will also discuss morality and how changing our present moral system will help to transform the dissident right into the right, as well as realize all of our political aspirations. It's a burgeoning new ideology that is only a few years old, but it can in potential appeal to many elites and would-be elites.
We need like a right-wing progressive scene. That's what we need. We need right-wing progressives. We need right-wingers that are actually interesting and creative and, you know, are thoughtful and respectful and smart. Because, I mean, you either get dumb idiot conservatives or you get, you know, faggot cuck liberals. And there's just like nothing in the middle. Like, you know, where is the smart but also based people? Smart but also based.
All it takes is one flame, one endorsement, and it may leave the confines of the dissident right while keeping its character. TLDR, read my manifesto. Anyways, that has been it for this year. In case you expected me to shill a bunch of YouTubers or Substack writers that I recommend, or my critique and rating of various movements on the dissident right, or literally anything else, I can do all of that if you push me hard enough in the comments, so feel free to leave a suggestion for my next video. It can be anything you want, and I wish you all a happy new year.